Theme continues as we go through Friday into Saturday, and temperatures likely to be near normal for the time of year.
Who is it?
We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. It's the NatWest Files Mark II. I will tell you how the bank genuinely believed I was being funded by the Russian state. I will tell you how fake news develops and the damage it can do. We'll look to France today, where the Interior Minister says he's simply going to start deporting people who are anti-Semitic, and he'll worry about the European Court of Human Rights afterwards. Maybe we should take a leaf out of their book. And we return to one of my favourite themes, HS2, but it's just getting worse and worse. It would appear that HS2 management deliberately and willfully misled the country about what the costs were. And remember, this was your money. I wonder, should they all be in court pretty soon? But before all of that, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, the top story from the GB newsroom is that Downing Street has confirmed 12 British citizens were killed during the Hamas terror attack in Israel on October the 7th. Another 5 remain missing. That comes after an 85-year-old Israeli woman was released by Hamas last night, and she described the hell of being taken into a spider web of tunnels under Gaza. Yocheved Lifshitz also said she was treated well and seen by a doctor during her ordeal. Hamas says she was returned along with another Israeli woman, Nurit Cooper, on humanitarian grounds. Their husbands, though, are still being held hostage. Yogoved's daughter Sharon, who's a British citizen, translated her mother's description of the abduction.
Home of people came through the fence. The defense cost 2.5 billion shekels, and it didn't help even a little bit. My mom is saying that she was taken on the back of a motorbike. When she first arrived, they told them that they are Muslims and they're not going to hurt them, and that they ate the same food that the Hamas was eating.
Meanwhile, the Israeli Security Agency has released footage of interviews with captured Hamas fighters. One says he was promised huge rewards for capturing hostages.
In Gaza, whoever brings the kidnaps gets a bonus.
How much is the bonus they give?
An apartment and $10,000.
For each person captured?
Yes.
Who told you this?
That's how it works in El Qassam Brigade.
The commander told you this?
Yes, the company commander.
For each captured, you get an apartment?
Yes, because they wanted as many kidnapped as possible. The goal of our infiltration for them was to capture and kidnap as many as we could.
Meanwhile, in news here at home, the number of hotels being used by the government to house asylum seekers, currently costing £8 million a day, is going to be reduced. The Immigration Minister has confirmed 50 will be exited, their words, by January, with that process beginning in the coming days. But Walthamstow MP Stella Creasy says refugees in her constituency have already been told to vacate their hotels with only a week's notice. She says the government's policy is leaving many asylum seekers on the street. And the Met Office is warning tonight of more bad weather, with a yellow weather warning in place for the south-east of England. In fact, an alert for rain. That's in force from now this evening until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. We'll keep you up to date on the state of the weather throughout the evening. Now, 2 women who died in a crash have been named by police as Cheryl Woods and Sarah Smith from Caerphilly. The mother and daughter were involved in a 5-vehicle collision on the M4 last Friday. And a man who died after his car was swept away in water near Aberdeen has also been named as Peter Pelling. At least 7 people are now thought to have died during Storm Babette. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Well, yet more I'm uncovering from the NatWest Bank. Subject, access request, all 600 pages of it, quite a bit to troll through. Now, this bit's important because back in April, when, of course, it was decided that, I would have my account closed, simultaneously, somebody quite senior in NatWest wrote this. In support of Coots's decision to exit Nigel Farage, significant adverse press, xenophobic comments, Russian connections, lack of clarity over source of wealth, I have confirmed that retail would have no appetite to onboard the customer if he were to apply to NatWest, Royal Bank or Ulster Bank brands. NF would represent a more complex customer beyond our vanilla commercial risk-reward appetite. So to be clear, when I was told my accounts were closing at Coots, there was absolutely no option to go to NatWest at all. Yet, a few months later, Dame Alison Rose, on the 20th of July, said, I've written to him today, meaning me, to make clear that we apologise and we reiterate our offer of alternative banking arrangements with NatWest Group. Oh, Alison Rose, you do so well, don't you? Or at least you think you do well, covering up lie after lie after lie. Are you really going to walk away from that board meeting on Thursday with £11.3 million, given that this bank is nearly 40% owned by the state? But even more seriously, in these documents, try this for size. He got paid from the Kremlin, bet he's a spy. Yep, they genuinely believed I was in the pay of Russian money. The previous statement I read out mentioned Russian connections. My links to Russia were mentioned 144 times in the Coots subject access request. I'll say it again. He got paid from the Kremlin, bet he's a spy. Tonight, albeit briefly, I want to talk to you about what fake news is. Why did people within that bank believe that one of the reasons I should be debanked is because of my connections and income from Russia? Well, this happened in the House of Commons, and it came from Sir Chris Bryant, Member of Parliament, Labour Member of Parliament for the Rhondda Valley in South Wales.
I don't understand why Aaron Banks, frankly, isn't on the list either. Even Isabel Oakeshott now thinks that he is an agent of influence for the Russian state. And I simply point out that Nigel Farage received from Russia Today £548,000, £573 in 2018 alone from the Russian state.
And that is what Coutts Bank believed. And that is what many other people in this country believed. And indeed, I even had to cancel one public appearance. Such was the threat of violence against me for being in the pay of the Russians. This is how fake news is created. Bryant did this using parliamentary privilege. Now, absolutely unbeknown to me until a couple of weeks ago, on the last day before the summer recess, in the middle of an afternoon debate on a totally different subject, Sir Chris Bryant had this to say.
In a previous debate on sanctions, I referred to the former leader of UKIP. And let me be absolutely clear, I have had no correspondence of any kind, electronic or in writing or digital, with Coutts Bank about him, or for that matter, about anybody else, because I don't have many constituents who bank with Coutts. I don't know, I have no idea why Coutts have closed his bank account. But I should have been more careful with the words that I used a year ago. The figure I gave was for his total income. I think that he has himself stated that he was paid for his appearances on Russia Today, and that Russia Today is, of course, a part of the Russian state. And he has made clear his respect for Vladimir Putin as a nationalist. But the figure I gave was nowhere near, I think, the accurate figure. So I apologise if I have inadvertently misled the House. I had no intention to do so, and I hope that that puts the record straight.
So there you are. He apologises for misleading the House. He doesn't apologise to me. He doesn't even name me at any point in that. And when he says the figure was misleading, it was nowhere near the number stated. No, Sir Chris, the number was zero. I earned zero in 2018 from any Russian-connected source of any kind whatsoever. That speech, given when it was, how it was at the time, got no press pickup at all. And this is what fake news is, folks. A narrative, an aggressive narrative that is untrue, gets created in the media, believed in the public, and when you get an apology, or half an apology as that was, nobody gets to hear of it. It does huge reputational damage. It is one of the reasons why, a major reason why, I was debanked. I'm joined by Professor Daniel Hodson, former Deputy CEO and Financial Director of Nationwide. Daniel, I'm uncovering an awful lot more this week about the culture that existed deep within the NatWest Bank. Alison Rose, when she apologised, said, some of the things that were said by Coutts did not reflect the wider bank. But clearly, some extraordinary political culture now appears to be at the heart of the kind of financial institutions that you've been a part of for much of your life.
Yes, it's a new thing, I think, and it's very worrying. I read, obviously, in detail what was said about you, and I have to say that I find it very disturbing. I don't think when I was involved in the retail banking industry that any of the staff would have behaved in this way. Of course, we tolerated the fact that everyone was entitled to political opinions, but to express them in this way is quite extraordinary. I'm afraid that it is one of the fallouts of Brexit, Nigel. Everything has got rather emotional and overtoned. But the point that you make about fake news is hugely important. And also the fact that the media, and, dare I mention our state broadcast like the BBC, don't always give the right bias, as it were. I think you were saying earlier how the spread of public opinion, and within the Tory party certainly, and within its voters, was very different from the parliamentary party itself. Yeah. I think that is true of the public as a whole. I think that our broadcasters, on the whole, tend to have a different distribution of opinion compared with the way that the country as a whole thinks.
Well, I think that's right. I think that's absolutely right. And yes, I expect it in much of mainstream media. I expect it of most of our members of parliament. It's just the fact this stuff has seeped in to our corporate structures, and that the FCA, the regulator, now instructs firms about what they should do to aid diversity and inclusion. And Daniel, they're also extending the test of who is a fit and proper person to work in financial services to include looking at their social media. Are we going too far with this?
Well, I mean, the social media issue is one which actually puts people off being involved in politics in the first place. But if you're talking about social media for people who are just going into a bank to get a job, that is extraordinary. And I think it's very unfortunate because, one of the great things about this country, and the thing that most people here, certainly I would go to the barriers for, is the protection of free speech. I work with people in non-political circumstances, and I've never been in any way put off by their various different political opinions.
No.
But I think the point that I want to make more than anything else is I know, because you've said it earlier, that there are 1 million people who don't have a bank account, whom 500,000 might well probably like to have one. But also we've got to realize that this is extremely damaging to our industry. I mean, I've had cases of firms who are exporting, for instance, to the Middle East, who get debanked simply because they're doing business with Saudi Arabia. That's disgraceful.
Yeah.
And that should not be the case.
No, absolutely. It's a massive problem. It affects the large and the small. It's been happening on a huge scale. I hope I've done my bit to lift the lid on it. Final thought, if I may, Daniel Hodgson. Yeah. The NatWest board meet this Thursday. Yeah. They will have had the so-called review given to them by a city firm of lawyers, and they will decide on the final pay package, including bonuses for Dame Alison Rose. Given that this is nearly 40% owned by the taxpayer, would it be wrong of me to say that she should not walk away with £11.3 million?
Well, I have 2 points to make here. One is I'm surprised that the shareholders involved in these banks, and of course 40% of the NatWest is actually us, the electorate, have not stepped in here. But so far as you're concerned, Nigel, and the future of Dame Alison Rose is concerned, you remember what I said last time we had a discussion about this. The money ought to go to charity. It ought to go to charities, for instance, who actually support people who are unbanked, who are affected by these actions, or some such enterprise. I don't suppose that's going to happen, and I imagine that she is going to get her 11 million. But it tells the wrong story at a time when I think that we need more exposure in the way that you've done, Nigel, of these kind of things. Thank you for doing it.
Daniel, thank you for your support. And I'm sure it's a great shock to you as a former financial director of Nationwide to see what's happened to that industry. Thank you for joining me again here on GB News, discussing this vital topic. And it is vital because it affects absolutely all of us. We cannot live and survive properly in the 21st century without banking services. And I've used my case. I've fought back against these so-and-sos, but I haven't just done it for me. I've done it for the unbanked all over the place. I want to see real change. In a moment, we head to Tel Aviv. We speak to Mark White. We're going to talk hostage releases. We're also going to be talking about some splits. It seems that the European Union, and indeed the boss of the United Nations, are telling Israel very different things to what they're hearing from us and the Americans. Mark White in Tel Aviv in just a moment.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m. Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are going straight to Tel Aviv to join Mark White, GB News' security editor, who is there. Mark, good evening to you. I suppose the release of 2 elderly hostages has rather dominated the debate today.
Yes, indeed, a rare good moment here in Israel over the last 2.5 weeks with the release of these 2 elderly women. They were in remarkably good shape despite their ordeal, and one of the women, in fact, giving a news conference, and she was very determined to get her point across, saying that she is willing to help the Israeli authorities with whatever information she can give them into the conditions she was held in and exactly where she was held in. She said that she was in a tunnel system. She walked for 2 to 3 hours in this tunnel system before getting into a central hallway. There was about 25 other hostages that she could see. It was like a spider's web of tunnels. So there's no doubt she's got valuable information that she can pass to the Israeli authorities, and they'll be speaking to her very gently, of course, given what she's been through, but they'll be speaking to her in the days ahead.
No, absolutely. And Mark, you know, there are still about 200 hostages that were taken on the 7th of October, somewhere probably in those tunnels, as was described to us. Is there any serious negotiation? Is there any indication why some have now been released?
Well, I don't think there's negotiation that is taking place on behalf of the Israeli government, or at least the Israeli government is not negotiating directly, but third parties such as Egypt, Qatar, the International Red Cross are certainly in some kind of dialogue with Hamas. But what we're seeing is the drip of hostages being released, 1 or 2 every 2 or 3 days. Now, if that pace continues, then this is going to span into not just weeks, but months. And all the time that this is happening, of course, there is increasing pressure on Israel not to proceed with the ground war, as countries who have citizens that are being held hostage want to see time given to these negotiations, but it is, according to Israeli officials, a Hamas tactic just to play for time.
Well, as you say, everybody was expecting the ground invasion to have happened a long time before now. It hasn't. But I notice that amongst the international community, there seems to be some quite strong pushback. We had this afternoon from the United Nations chief, Antonio Guterres, who was accused, and this is the boss of the UN, who was accused Israel of clear breaches of international humanitarian law. We've had the European Union's foreign minister sort of urging that perhaps military action in Gaza is not the alternative, yet it appears the Americans and the British are rather on the other side. Is there perhaps, and maybe it comes from the more globalist organisations like the EU and the UN, is there a slight, in your view, a slight fracturing of support for Israel in the international community?
Well, there's certainly, I think, some concern about these bodies such as the UN and the European Union and just how committed they are to Israel's fight. There's deep anger here in Israel this evening at the comments, in particular from the UN Secretary General, saying not just that there was clear violations of international law, but also saying that this attack on the 7th of October did not happen in a vacuum, that the people of Palestine have suffered 56 years of occupation where their land has been steadily taken over by settlements, and they've suffered violence. Now, that's had an immediate reaction from Israel, from the UN envoy from Israel, saying that that really is just appalling, shocking, and totally detached from reality.
Yeah.
That the UN Secretary General appears in what he's saying to be excusing those horrific attacks on the 7th of October.
I must say that was very much my feeling, Mark, too. And of course, the accurate truth as far as Gaza is concerned, that Israel withdrew many, many, many years ago. Finally, Mark White, if I may, what is the military situation? What is the situation with rockets coming into and going out of Israel today?
Well, we've still got a mass staging really on the border with Gaza. No go-ahead yet for that major ground operation. Instead, what we've had is an intensification of the airstrikes to try to target those key Hamas targets, including the launchers every time they pop up to fire rockets into Israel. And I think a worrying development today, actually, Nigel, in that central Israel, including here in Tel Aviv, came under its largest rocket bombardment since the start of this conflict on the 7th of October. We rushed for the shelter, like everyone else in central Tel Aviv. Dozens of rockets intercepted by the Iron Dome missile defense system, but at least one rocket got through, badly damaging a house northeast of Tel Aviv. And the worrying factor is the Israeli mission to carry out these strikes is about degrading Hamas's ability to launch these rockets, among other things. And clearly there seems to be no shortage of these deadly weapons that they can launch towards Israel.
No, it's a very fair point. Mark White, thank you for that report live from Tel Aviv. Whatever the historical rights or wrongs, folks, of all of this, I do think that what happened on the 7th of October with that incursion into Israel, with those murderous, horrendous, barbarous attacks, and yet I feel Israel actually does have a right to fight back, yet the UN and the EU are wobbling, leaving Israel in a very difficult position. In a moment, the French Interior Minister is really talking tough. He says, if you're out there, if you're an Islamic radical, if you're being anti-Semitic, we are going to deport you and the ECHR can go to hell. I'll ask in a minute whether they really can do that.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
In New York, a few moments ago, Donald Trump arrived at yet another court case. Yes, this one is the civil fraud trial being held in New York. Trump responds before going into the courthouse. I built a great company that's coming out, that's actually things that are coming out. What a great company I built. Trump says about Michael Cohen's testimony, we're not worried at all about his testimony. So Michael Cohen was Trump's lawyer. He's testifying against Trump. The big problem will be, in all the other cases, he will find people that in the past he worked with will actually come out and plead guilty. And this is all because of the way that plea bargaining works in America. They'll tell you there are 20 charges against you, and if you lose, it's 150 years in prison. But plead guilty to one charge, and you'll probably get a 3-month sentence suspended. And that's why 98% of cases in America finish up with guilty pleas. I admire much about America, but its judicial system absolutely stinks. Now, talking of judicial systems, of course, Europe has its European Court of Human Rights, its European Convention on Human Rights, and it's beginning to come under challenge. Oh, no, not from this country, goodness gracious me, no. But it was interesting that in Germany, where we really have seen some very violent scenes on the streets, and the Star of David being painted, spray-painted on houses where Jews live, and many other extraordinary and awful things, petrol bombs at synagogues, and all of this in the country that said in 1945, never again. As I reported last night, the German Chancellor, in Der Spiegel, said we're going to have to start deportations. But what really caught my eye today was the French Interior Minister, and his name is Gerald Darmanin, and he has said France will deport foreigners deemed a threat without waiting for the European Court of Human Rights to hear their appeal. Well, this is really, really interesting indeed. I wonder, Martin Howe, KC, as someone that specialises in EU law at all levels, could the French simply just defy this court in their own country of Strasbourg, or is this just political sort of baton waving?
I don't know how serious it is, but knowing the French, they probably will go through with it because they have a history of being rather more robust with these international courts than we are. And it's the same thing as when we were in the EU, where, you know, various countries were getting away, including the French, with not implementing common EU rules. And of course, Muggins in this country obeyed everything to the letter.
Yeah, I can see the parallels, very clearly see the parallel. But what, I mean, if a state like France was to breach, you know, some fundamental principles of the ECHR, of that convention, and there was a judgment in Strasbourg again, what would happen? I mean, they'd simply get fined, would they, as a government?
Well, at the end of the day, there's just a big row in the Council of Europe. I mean, you know, when Russia was a member, Putin regularly got hauled over the coals, and nothing persuaded him to obey any judgments of the European Court of Human Rights. So at the end of the day, it's pretty toothless.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because here it would appear that Westminster is terrified of it. I mean, here we're waiting for the Supreme Court judgment on Rwanda, and, you know, maybe the judges will, you know, bring in the convention in that against the government, and even if the government wins, they can still get taken to Strasbourg. And you mentioned this point about, you know, EU membership. We are naturally, are we not, a country that if we want to be part of a club, we believe we pay the membership fee and we kind of obey the rules. Because there are some, Martin Howe, suggesting that maybe we could be a bit more like Gerald Darmignon, that we could just say, the hell with it, we're just going to do what we want. But we never do we?
We don't, and I think it's not necessarily a good idea for us to change our, you know, to not obeying laws or not obeying international treaties. But I think what we need to do is be rather more careful about what we sign up to. And the problem with the European Convention on Human Rights, it's not so much the convention as it was drafted originally, which is unobjectionable and gained widespread support across the political spectrum. It's 50 years of judgments by the Strasbourg Court that have changed it.
And judicial activism at every level.
Judicial activism. And indeed, this whole business of it acting against deportations was an invention of the Strasbourg Court. It was never intended to be an asylum convention. It was, in fact, negotiated in parallel with the Geneva Asylum Convention.
Because we're always told by the Labour Party, well, hang on, it was British lawyers that drafted it. We should be very proud of it. But the point you're making is it's a very different animal.
It's an extremely different animal from the animal that was drafted. And at the end of the day, the big question is, you know, why do we need to belong to it anymore as a country?
Well, you see, I get this sense that, and we're going to be out on the road. This show's going to be in Cardiff tomorrow and in St Austell in Cornwall on Thursday. And it's just so interesting to get outside London and talk to folk. And they can't understand why, if we voted Brexit, there's still this sort of foreign court that they don't fully understand. There's no reason why they should. Is this going to become an election issue, in your opinion?
I think it's bound to. I mean, the immediate issue, of course, is the boat people and the Rwanda issue. But that's only one of the many things which the European Convention has caused problems on. I mean, Ben Wallace, the outgoing Defence Secretary, made the point that it interferes severely with military operations abroad. And the Convention was never intended to apply extraterritorially. That's a pure invention of the Strasbourg Court.
So it's time to leave, is it, Martin Howe?
Well, my view is it's time to leave. In fact, 10 years ago, I was on a commission on the Bill of Rights set up by the Cameron government, you know, coalition government. And we were looking at ways of sort of modifying its application and things. But I mean, I think we've gone past that sort of approach. And really, that there is no purpose for this country to remain in it. You know, why should we have a sort of regional court?
But we'll become like Belarus and Russia, they'll say.
Well,
because they're not part of it.
Well, they decide. I mean, you know, they decided to leave for very different reasons. I mean, the reason for leaving would be it's impossible, unfortunately, to stay in the convention and not be bound by the court. The court is
because of our culture,
and because of our culture, we don't want to belong to clubs and then not obey the rules, as you put it. And if the rules are not acceptable, and I think they aren't, then we should leave. And then I come back to the real point. What is the benefit to us in staying? I've no idea. It's just waving arms around and saying, oh, we're you know, we'll be regarded as bad people.
I think The Guardian would tell us it's protecting us against bad, evil governments, but I don't think our governments, they may make mistakes, but I doubt they're bad or evil.
Well, we're a democratic system, and at the end of the day, the electorate punish dictatorial governments.
Really interesting. Martin Howe, thank you very much indeed for coming on. I think this will become a very major national debate. Now, you all know, regulars to this show, I am vehemently opposed to the ULEZ extension. I think it hits people, particularly those who are retired, those who haven't got much money, and those that are well off and have got brand new cars don't actually have to pay it. Well, one man, Christopher Oxenham, who's a retired insurance broker who lives in Wallingham, up on the North Downs Ridge, not too far away from me, actually, Christopher. This is an extraordinary story because he has been charged, a ULEZ charge, on 14 occasions, despite claiming he's never been into the zone. And Christopher Oxenham joins me live from Wallingham. Christopher, good evening. Welcome to the programme. So I'm guessing that you must live just outside the ULEZ zone.
I'm just inside, actually. I'm in a sort of leafy lane. You could argue Wallingham, but I come under the parish of Sarnested, which is part of Croydon, and the other side of the road comes under Tandridge Council. So that would be Surrey. So if I go up my lane and turn left, as I do every day, I'm fine. If I turn right, which I haven't done, I'm in the ULEZ.
Right. And, Chris, I can see that your car has a personalised number plate. So, you know, if you claim you've not been into the zone, but you're avoiding going into the zone, how come you've got 14 charges?
Yeah. I mean, I find my life to a degree is pretty restricted now. Silly things I can't go and see. Friend in Purley, cousin in Woldingham. In Waddington. I can't go to the dry cleaners. I can't go to the Bromley shopping. I can't go to the dentist. All because they're within ULEZ, or unless I pay £12.50, which I'm not prepared to pay because I think it's ridiculous, to be honest with you. There are other ways of dealing with this, but I mean, see, I view this as an abuse of legal process because they're continuing a lack of due diligence. They know my number, but they're allocating it to other vehicles. So my number is 22 CPO, quite easy. But any vehicle, including 22 CPO, that is compliant or non-compliant gets captured, and I get a fine.
So all sorts of makes of car, then, that have got 22 CPO somewhere in it,
From
and you
Volvo
get the
to
bill and they
Vans,
don't.
From Fords to Toyotas. And
absolutely extraordinary. And just finally, the point you were making there.
Not just the amount of money, because they do credit you once you complain, but how does one deal with the fact that you are guilty, first of all? Yeah. They obviously computerise it, they charge you, and you have to prove that you're innocent with a picture of your car and your number plate. I mean, I was in hospital once when I got done. I was in Norfolk the last time I got done. It's ludicrous, and quite frankly, their cameras are not fit, and the whole process is not fit for purpose. They know it, I know it, and everybody else knows it.
Christopher Oxenham, thank you for coming on and telling us your story. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And TfL in response have said, Transport for London have said, we apologise for any distress this has caused Mr Oxenham. This is a very rare occurrence, but unfortunately our automatic number plate recognition cameras have misinterpreted the registrations on the other cars as Mr Oxenham's registration, and incorrect charges were applied. We have refunded all the charges paid and have put in extra measures involving further checks to avoid this happening in the future. Well, it's all well and good, isn't it? But it's pretty much of a bore for Mr Oxenham. And you can see, talking to him, that he just, his life has been fundamentally changed by these cameras. To what end, to what benefit? Certainly nothing to do with air quality. Let's stick with transport. Let's stick with the great white elephant of modern times, HS2. Some very, very significant claims made by whistleblowers in a very good piece in the Sunday Times this week. It's not that it was new, but it was all brought together, and it would appear that the bosses, at least this is the accusation, that the bosses of HS2 have been misleading people about the true costs of the project. And when you bear in mind this is 100% taxpayers' money, this, I think, is a very serious situation. HS2, and are we being defrauded? In just a moment.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too. In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows,
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Did the bosses at HS2 deliberately conceal rapidly rising costs so that they'd make sure the government kept pumping the billions in? And if they did, well, that would be a pretty serious charge. Now, I'm joined here in the studio by Andrew Bruce, former head of planning and performance at HS2. Well, Andrew, you were there from 2015 to 2016, yes, in a senior position. And as I understand it, from what I've read and what I've seen, you were specifically involved with the part of the project that was repossessing houses up and down the line.
Correct.
So just tell us your story, what you saw.
OK. When I got to HS2, my job description was to buy all the land within a budget of £2.8 billion.
Right.
So that was very specific.
And you had experience in doing this in previous jobs before?
I had, yes. I'm a chartered civil engineer.
Yep.
I've done a lot of properties.
So you've got £2.8 billion to spend?
Yes.
Buying up properties up and down the line?
Yes. And I was given 3 key tasks. The first, I had to identify how many properties. There was 11,420 of them. It was very clear. I had to know when we were going to buy those properties, also very clear, because construction told me exactly when they wanted those properties. What was less clear was how much those properties were going to be valued at, what the cost was. Now, I was given the official HS2 budget. It was £2.8 billion. It was in my job description. It was part of the... everybody knew what the value was. But when I started looking at the figures, very quickly, within my first week, I realised that there was a very large fundamental problem with that estimate. It was wrong, very clearly wrong.
It was wrong because the compensation that was paid as a result of the compulsory purchase was more than £2.8 billion.
Not only that, we knew that in 2014, 3 years before HS2 actually got permission through Parliament to proceed, we already knew that the budget was £2 billion. We needed £2 billion more than the actual budget.
So you were employed by HS2, well paid, I'm sure, in a senior role with a big job to do on an entirely false premise.
Exactly. And it became a real problem very quickly for 2 reasons. Probably the biggest reason that I was most upset about was we were taking people's property from them, but we didn't have the money to pay. So the team that I was with was deliberately undervaluing their properties because we didn't actually have the funds to pay them properly for what their properties were worth. And I felt that was very wrong. And I felt that I could do something about that from the inside. If I showed HS2 actually how much money we really needed, and in fact how much money HS2 had, they commissioned estimates of very experienced property surveyors who'd already told HS2 it wasn't 2.8 billion, it was at least £2 billion.
So more like 4.8 billion.
4.8 billion was the figure I had.
So you run into this problem. You've been given a job on a false premise. You haven't got the money to pay people. Some poor house owners are getting really badly done by the system.
Yes.
But does this facade continue?
Yes. So what I decided to do from the inside was we commissioned a report from Deloitte. It took about 3 months to produce this, and that report was going to be a programme plan. We started with 0 people, 0 capability, 0 capacity, and in a fairly short period of time, we had to take on the largest land compulsory acquisition since the Second World War. We were actually going to try and take on 70 square kilometres of land. It's a huge amount of land for HS2. And for that, I realised that I had to show HS2 that the 2.8 billion was wrong, and in fact used their own figures. It wasn't figures that I made up. It was HS2's own figures to ask for that budget to be raised so we could actually pay people properly.
And what happened?
So what happened was we wrote a report. Deloitte wrote a report. It cost millions of pounds to write this report. It took months to do. We had some very serious help. When that report was completed and we wanted to submit that and use it to create the programme and the projects to move it forwards, a new property director came in. And his first task was to tell me, Andrew, take all these reports, shred them, put them in the shredding bin, destroy them. And I said, but this is 3 months worth of work. This is our plan to move forward. This is to show how much money we really need, how we're going to do this properly, honestly, to the taxpayer. And he says, shred it. We had to shred it. He then asked me to write a brand new programme, but I had to write it myself in 4 days. We just spent millions of pounds in 3 months shredding it.
Well, it's only public money, I suppose. But...
Now, I'd been involved all the way through with the Deloittes. You know, it had my name on it. I'd signed it off. When I wrote my report, my director was then furious because I'd made reference to what he called the Deloitte report. They had 8 swim lanes, I had 8 swim lanes. They had 13 projects, I had 13. He made me rewrite it. But eventually that got through, and I thought I was making progress. When I thought I was making progress, we then put it in front of the Department for Transport. Some very senior people from the Department for Transport were there, and other senior executives. And I managed in February of 2016 to show them, firstly, the 2.8 billion budget we had. The first problem was it was 1.2 billion in error. But also, there was things like we were 1/3 of the properties had accidentally been valued at 0, which was in error. 1/3 of the properties had been valued at under £1,000, and these were big properties.
This is why we were £2 billion out, basically.
In error, yes. And so I was adding on the additions.
Yeah. So what happens in the end, Andrew? Do they kick you out?
So in the end,
you resign, or?
The day that I had to formally submit this report, it was the 6th of April. I'd set up the room, the Department for Transport was coming in, I was about to put it in, I was called into a side room, security was there, I was escorted out of the building, really without explanation. And a week later, I got a letter saying that I was dismissed.
Andrew, if this happened in your sector, if your sector of HS2 was willfully and deliberately, and the government and the public were misled as to what, hence the costs keep escalating, what do you think should happen to these HS2 directors?
I think what they did was criminal. You know, I think it was fraudulent. It was a fraud against the British public.
Well,
I think the police need to get involved. I think these people should.
Andrew Bruce, they are very strong words. And thank you for coming in and delivering them. Now, we do have a response, which won't surprise you. HS2 Limited have said, in the course of updating estimates on land and property, costs have increased. And we have been completely transparent about this process. It said no order was given to destroy the Deloitte report, and it was not shredded. It said electronic copies were retained. Department for Transport said the government and its public bodies take such claims seriously. They will ensure they are thoroughly investigated. So there you are. The reports weren't shredded, Andrew Bruce.
I shredded them personally myself.
There you
I
are.
have to shred them.
There you are. Well, Jacob Rees-Mogg has been sitting in with me, listening to all of this. It's really pretty shocking what Andrew Bruce is saying.
It is, isn't it? And the more one hears about HS2, the worse it sounds. The huge waste of public money, the carelessness about it from the outset of the project, and the failure to tell ministers or Parliament what was really happening.
Well, I think the problem here with what Andrew Bruce is saying is that it's not carelessness. It's actually willfully.
It becomes willful, isn't it? That they make mistakes.
It may start sloppily, but it becomes willful.
And then they become willfully obstructive and fire people who are whistleblowing. And that seems to have happened. The Sunday Times had a detailed report on that the weekend.
I was saying earlier, the Sunday Times brought together a lot of strands of stories that were already out there, and it was actually very compelling. Well, I have to say, you know, I hope very much that that Andrew Bruce is right, and that we do get these people to actually have to stand up in court and defend what they did. It's our money, for goodness sake.
It's our money, that's right.
Bonkers.
Which has been frittered away.
A bit like NatWest. A lot of that's our money too.
It is indeed. They love you, don't they? I mean, that is extraordinary.
It's vile, isn't it?
Well, I hope whoever it is who said that you should have something thrown at you, yoghurt, is fired. Well, but I think that's absolutely outrageous. And, you know, it's fair enough not to like politicians. It's fair enough to shout at them. But throwing substances at them is just monstrous.
There's more to come. There's more to come on NatWest, folks. You wait. Jacob, very quickly, what have you got
We're
tonight?
going to be following on from you. ECHR, we've got to leave it. The time has come. Even the French are fed up with it.
Absolutely.
You know, if it's not even good enough for the French, it's certainly not good enough for us.
Jacob Rees-Mogg says, do exactly as the French do. You heard it here first. You'll probably never, ever hear it again. That's it from me. Let's have a look at the very wet weather.
Hello again, it's Alex Burkill here with your latest GB News weather update. For some, it will be a little bit chilly overnight, but in the south we have some heavy rain arriving. That's in association with an area of low pressure currently just to the southwest, but this is going to skirt its way eastwards along the English Channel as we go through the night into Wednesday. That will then bring a significant amount of rain across southern parts, the heaviest rain likely to be in the south-southeast, and here we could see some disruption to travel, perhaps some localised flooding too. too. Elsewhere towards the east of Scotland, a bit wet and quite cloudy, but further west, northwest, some clear skies, so turning a little bit chilly. A touch of frost possible across some parts of western Scotland. A very wet start then in the southeast on Wednesday morning could cause some problems during the morning rush hour, but the rain should clear away, and then it's a drier picture across many parts of England, Wales into Northern Ireland as we go into the afternoon, but cloudy and wet across eastern parts of Scotland. Some significant rainfall possible here. Temperatures near normal for the time of year, highs around 14, possibly 15 Celsius. As we look towards Thursday, it's going to be quite an unsettled wet day. We have a band of rain that will push its way northeastwards as we go through the morning. Behind it then, some hefty showers are quite likely. Notice some towards the south coast and perhaps in the far east as well. And it's going to be quite blustery too. The unsettled theme continues as we go through Friday into Saturday, and temperatures likely to be near normal for the time of year.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. The British government is set to terminate contracts with 50 hotels for the housing of migrants. It currently costs you £3 billion a year and rising. But could the tide be turning? Well, it seems the British aren't alone in the matter, as the French are set to implement their toughest crackdown on foreign criminals in 30 years, regardless of whether it's a direct breach of the ECHR. I want the United Kingdom formally to withdraw from the jurisdiction of this court. And speaking of our friends in Europe, the latest fissure has emerged from the Israel-Hamas conflict. While the British and American governments have taken a strong stance in support of an Israeli counteroffensive, European officials, including the French Prime Minister and the lead EU foreign diplomat, have called for ceasefires. But what would a ceasefire achieve when genocidal terrorists remain at large? The former jihadi bride, Shamima Begum, the young girl who went off to join ISIS, is set to begin her legal battle for her citizenship in the Court of Appeal. Perhaps going against the grain of my fellow Conservatives, I believe Miss Begum is our responsibility and should be allowed back into Britain to face trial. In a bid to give the City of London a post-Brexit boost, banker bonus caps are set to be axed as of next week. The usual suspects, like the Trade Union Congress, have expressed outrage on the matter, but usually that's an indicator that it's the right policy. Plus, I should say it's been a busy day in Westminster. By day, I'm a legislator, but by night, I go by Jacob Rees-Attenborough, rescuing pigeons stuck behind bathroom walls of a mock Georgian terrace.
Well, here we are, in the Rees-Mogg bathroom, just behind the wall where there's a hatch for the pipes to run.
State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by a theatrical panel this evening, barrister and former Tory MP Jerry Hayes and the Trans-Caucasia expert and former Labour MP Stephen Pound. As always, I want to hear from you. It's the most important part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. Now it's time for the news of the day with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, Downing Street tonight has confirmed 12 British citizens were killed during the Hamas terror attack in Israel. Another 5 are still missing. And it comes after an 85-year-old Israeli hostage released by Hamas last night described the hell of being taken into a spider web of underground tunnels in Gaza. Yocheved Lifshitz also said she was treated well and seen by a doctor during her ordeal. Hamas says she was returned along with other Israeli women, Nuret Cooper, on humanitarian grounds. Their husbands are being held as hostages. Yocheved's daughter, Sharon, who's a British citizen, translated her mother's description of her abduction.
A swarm of people came through the fence. The defense cost 2.5 billion shekels, and it didn't help even a little bit. My mum is saying that she was taken on the back of a motorbike when she first arrived. They told them that they are Muslims and they're not going to hurt them, and that they ate the same food that the Hamas was eating.
Meanwhile, the Israeli Security Agency has released footage of interviews with captured Hamas fighters, where one says they were promised huge rewards for capturing hostages.
In Gaza, whoever brings the kidnaps gets a bonus.
How much is the bonus they give?
An apartment and $10,000.
For each person captured?
Yes.
Who told you this?